Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm 28, and last Thanksgiving, my parents told me not to come home. They said they needed space. I thought it was just a bad week, until I found out why they really didn't want me there. What started as a quiet rejection turned into a moment they'll never forget, and neither will I. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about family, heartbreak, and courage. It was a Wednesday morning, 3 days before Thanksgiving, when my phone started buzzing across the kitchen counter. The screen flashed Mom. I smiled automatically, wiping my hands on a towel as I reached for it. I thought maybe she wanted me to bring her pumpkin pie recipe again, or remind me to leave early before traffic got bad. But the call didn't connect. Instead, a notification popped up. One new voicemail. I frowned. Mom never left voicemails. She hated them, said they made her sound too formal. I pressed play anyway, still smiling, still completely unprepared. Hey Maddie, it's Mom. Dad and I have been talking, and we think it might be best if you don't come home this year. We need some space. Things have been a little tense lately, and we just need time to reset. Love you, sweetheart. Happy Thanksgiving. That was it. No explanation. No warmth. Just don't come home. My thumb hovered over the pause button. My mind blank for a few seconds before the words began to sink in. We need space. That phrase kept echoing in my head like a dripping faucet. Space from what? From me? The smell of burnt toast pulled me back to the present. I yanked it out of the toaster, tossed it in the sink, and leaned against the counter. My apartment felt smaller than ever. One bedroom, peeling paint near the window, and a cat that wasn't mine but liked to sit outside my door like we had a lease agreement. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And now, it was where I'd be spending Thanksgiving. I replayed that voicemail 3 times. The second time, I tried to hear any hint of hesitation in her voice, some crack, some small sign that she didn't mean it. The third time, I realized what made it worse. She sounded calm, like she'd already made peace with it. I thought about calling her back, demanding to know what she meant. But I didn't. Instead, I opened the fridge, stared at a half-empty jar of pickles and a takeout container, and decided to go to the grocery store. If I was going to be alone, I might as well make something that felt normal. The store was already crowded. Families with carts full of turkeys and sweet potatoes, couples arguing over pie crusts, teenagers trailing behind their parents looking bored. I wandered down the aisles pretending I was one of them. A woman beside me grabbed the last box of cornbread mix. She smiled apologetically, saying, "It's chaos in here, huh?" I forced a small smile. Yeah, feels like everyone's planning for something big. She laughed and kept walking. I stared at the empty shelf and realized I wasn't planning for anything. I ended up buying a frozen turkey dinner, a bottle of wine, and a small pecan pie. Not because I loved pecan pie, but because my mom did. Maybe it made me feel closer to her, even if she didn't want me close. Back home, I tried to keep busy. I cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, scrolled through old photos on my phone. There was one from last year's Thanksgiving. Dad carving the turkey, Mom holding her wine glass, my brother Luke joking about my burnt rolls. Everyone was laughing. Everyone except me. I'd been sitting there, smiling quietly, trying to ignore the tension that always followed Luke's jokes. The ones about how I never stuck with anything. Mom would laugh, Dad would say, "Now Luke, be nice," and that was it. My feelings were never part of the equation. So maybe I shouldn't have been surprised that this year, they decided to skip me altogether. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch with my phone. I finally texted Mom. "Hey, got your voicemail. Are you okay? Did I do something wrong?" I waited, watched the 3 dots appear, then disappear. No reply. So I scrolled through Instagram. Luke had posted a photo of himself and his wife at my parents' house, already there. The caption read, "Home sweet home. Can't wait for Mom's famous stuffing." My stomach dropped. So they weren't taking space. They were just taking space from me. I clicked through the photos. The kitchen decorated with fall leaves, the same dishes Mom only took out once a year, and Luke holding my dad's old carving knife like some heirloom he'd earned. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about needing space. This was about picking sides. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that family photo from last year. Me standing just a little off to the side, smiling like I belonged. Maybe I'd been fooling myself the whole time. Around midnight, I got up and turned on the TV for background noise. Some old holiday movie was playing. Perfect families, perfect dinners, people learning the true meaning of the holidays. I laughed bitterly and muted it. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from Dad. Hey Maddie. Hope you understand about this year. We just think everyone needs a little breather. Love you, kiddo. Everyone. Everyone but me. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. For the first time in my life, I didn't text him back. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my chest. I didn't cry though. I just felt hollow. I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The air was cold and crisp, the kind that smells like wood smoke and cinnamon. Kids were playing football on the street, their parents calling them in for dinner. It all looked so normal. So easy. When I passed a bakery window, I stopped. There were pies lined up on the counter. Apple, cherry, pecan. My mom's favorite. I don't know what made me go in. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was spite. I bought one and carried it home carefully, like it was something fragile. Back in my apartment, I set it on the table, stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom." It wasn't bitter. It was quiet, almost peaceful. That night, I called my best friend Sarah. She picked up on the second ring. "Maddie. Hey, what's going on? You okay?" I tried to sound normal. "Yeah, just weird Thanksgiving this year. My parents said they needed some space." There was silence on the other end. Then softly, "What? Why? I wish I knew." I laughed, but it didn't sound right. Guess they just didn't want me there. Sarah exhaled. "That's awful. Do you want to come over tomorrow? My mom always makes too much food." I hesitated. "Thanks, but I think I need to figure this out first." "Figure what out?" I paused, looking at the pie again. Whether I'm really the problem, or if they just don't want to see who I've become. She didn't have an answer. Neither did I. Later, I sat by the window, watching lights flicker in other apartments, silhouettes of families laughing, passing dishes, clinking glasses. My own reflection stared back at me. Tired eyes, messy hair, and that same small, practiced smile I always wore around my parents. I realized something then. I'd spent years trying to earn my place at their table. Being polite, forgiving, quiet. Maybe that's why they thought they could just uninvite me. They assumed I'd stay quiet forever. But this time I wouldn't. Because somewhere between that voicemail and this empty apartment, something inside me had changed. They wanted space? Fine. But space can make people see things they've ignored for years. And this time, it wasn't just them who'd realized their mistake. It would be me too. When I hung up the phone that night, the silence in my apartment was so thick I could almost feel it pressing against my chest. The words my mother had said, "We need some space, honey," kept echoing, playing over and over like a scratched record I couldn't stop. I sat there at the edge of my small couch, staring at the half-written grocery list I'd made for the Thanksgiving dinner I thought we were going to share. My pen was still in my hand, but my mind was far away, lost somewhere between confusion and hurt. At first, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe my parents were fighting again. They'd had their share of arguments, the kind that got louder after a glass of wine, or after Dad's long work days. But space? From me? That part didn't fit. I wasn't the one causing tension. I'd done everything to keep peace. Even when they'd bickered in front of me, I'd brushed it off and changed the topic. Still, something in my mother's voice felt off. It wasn't just tired. It was measured, like she was carefully choosing each word, afraid I'd catch on to something. The next morning, I woke up early, not because I wanted to, but because my mind refused to rest. I brewed some coffee and sat by the window, watching the sun rise over the quiet street. My phone sat on the counter, face down, as if it too was avoiding me. I thought about calling my dad. Maybe he'd give me a different story, or at least some kind of clue. But the last time I tried calling after Mom and I had a disagreement, he didn't answer. He always said it was because he didn't want to get in the middle. So instead of calling, I texted, "Hey Dad, just checking in. Everything okay?" I waited. Minutes turned into hours. Then finally, a reply. All good here. Just taking some time. Love you. Taking some time. The same vague words. The same distance. That's when I knew something wasn't right. My parents were private, yes, but they were never cold. Not like this. I decided to visit anyway. Not to intrude, but just to see. Maybe I could drop off a pumpkin pie or something small. It was a 3-hour drive from my apartment to my parents' house in upstate New York, and though my gut told me not to go, my heart said otherwise. The drive felt longer than usual. Every mile carried a question I couldn't answer. Were they okay? Was someone sick? Were they planning a divorce? By the time I turned onto their street, the familiar houses lined with fall decorations looked the same. Cozy, peaceful, normal. But when I pulled into my parents' driveway, I noticed something strange. There were 2 extra cars parked outside. One was my aunt's, my mother's sister, who lived 2 towns over. The other belonged to someone I didn't recognize. I sat in my car for a moment, heart thudding. My parents hadn't mentioned any visitors. If they were having guests for Thanksgiving, why tell me to stay home? Curiosity, and maybe a little anger, pushed me forward. I stepped out, clutching the pie I'd brought, the cool air biting against my skin. When I reached the porch, I could hear laughter inside. Loud. Carefree. The kind that didn't sound like space. I knocked. Once. Then again. The laughter paused, replaced by hurried footsteps. The door opened, and there stood my mother, her face instantly freezing when she saw me. Madeline, she said, voice tight. What are you doing here? I tried to smile. I just thought I'd stop by. To check in. I brought pie. Her eyes darted behind her, then back to me. Honey, we told you we needed some time. This isn't a good. Then a man's voice interrupted. Who's at the door? It wasn't my dad. My stomach dropped. From behind her, I saw movement. My aunt, my cousin, even my brother who had supposedly been working late all week. Everyone was there. Everyone but me. Madeline, my mom said, lowering her voice. We didn't want to hurt you, but what? I cut her off, my voice trembling. You didn't want to hurt me, so you lied? She sighed, stepping outside and closing the door behind her. It's just things have been tense. You know how holidays get. Your father thought maybe it'd be easier if I wasn't here? I said sharply. If your daughter wasn't part of Thanksgiving? Her eyes softened for a moment, but there was guilt there, unmistakable, heavy guilt. I didn't want to cry, but the sting behind my eyes burned anyway. Just tell me the truth, Mom. Why? What's really going on? She hesitated, then finally whispered. It's about your dad. And Lisa. Lisa. The name hit me like a punch. Lisa was my mother's best friend. She'd been around since I was little. She came to family cookouts, birthdays, everything. What about her? I asked slowly. My mom looked down. They've been spending time together. Too much time. I didn't want you to find out like this. The ground felt like it disappeared under me. I could barely breathe. You're saying Dad's. Please, she interrupted, voice breaking. Don't say it. Not here. Behind her, the muffled sounds of laughter returned. I caught a glimpse through the narrow window, my dad, sitting at the dining table, smiling with a plate of food in front of him. Next to him, Lisa. My hand tightened around the pie until it almost slipped. I couldn't look anymore. The drive back home felt like a blur. I don't even remember starting the car. The radio played, but it was just noise, background static to the chaos in my head. By the time I pulled into my apartment, the sun had already set, and the cold November air had grown sharper. I left the pie on the counter, untouched, and sat on the floor, my back against the cabinet. My parents, the same people who taught me honesty and family above all, had lied to me. They told me to give them space, not because they were struggling, but because they didn't want me to see what they'd become. That night, I cried for hours. Not just for the betrayal, but for the realization that my family, the people I thought I knew best, were strangers in a house full of secrets. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and an ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I made coffee, but it tasted bitter, no matter how much sugar I added. That's when my phone buzzed again. A message from Dad. Hey kiddo. Sorry things have been weird lately. We'll talk soon, okay? Talk soon. Like nothing happened. I didn't reply. I couldn't. But something in me shifted that morning. For the first time, I wasn't going to be the quiet, forgiving daughter. The one who accepted excuses and brushed things under the rug. They wanted space? Fine. I'd give it to them, just not the way they expected. Because space works both ways. And they were about to find out what it really feels like to lose it. The following week, I started putting a plan together. Not for revenge in a dramatic sense, but for clarity. I wanted them to understand what they'd done, not through confrontation, but through silence, through distance. I stopped calling, stopped texting. I even unfollowed them on social media. Thanksgiving came and went, and I spent it alone, quietly, peacefully, with a store-bought turkey dinner and a bottle of wine. It wasn't the Thanksgiving I'd imagined, but it was the first one that felt honest. A few days later, my aunt called. She sounded hesitant, almost guilty. Madeline, honey, your mom's been asking about you. She feels awful. Does she? I asked softly. Did she feel awful when she shut the door in my face? There was a pause. Then a sigh. Families make mistakes. Maybe you should come by, talk it out. I wanted to, but I also wanted them to miss me. To feel the weight of their decision, the emptiness of the space they demanded. Maybe, I said finally. But not yet. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, control. I wasn't the daughter begging to be included anymore. I was the woman deciding who deserved a place in her life. And for the first time, that felt like freedom. That night, as I sat by the window again, the wind rattled the glass softly. Outside, lights from nearby apartments glowed warm and steady. Other families, other dinners, other laughter. Mine was quiet. Still. But maybe that's what I needed. Space, real space, to see things for what they were. And little did I know, that silence I'd chosen would soon echo louder than any words I'd ever spoken. I don't remember the exact moment I decided to host that dinner. Maybe it was somewhere between exhaustion and courage. The air still carried the chill of late November, but inside me, something colder had settled. After all those days of silence, guilt messages, and their carefully crafted excuses, I realized something. If my parents wanted space, then they could have it, just not the kind they imagined. That's when the idea of the dinner came to me. Not revenge. Not closure. Just a mirror. I wanted them to finally see the daughter they'd pushed away. The one they'd treated like a temporary guest in her own family. So, I set the date. Dinner Sunday evening. My place. The text was short, polite, impossible to misread. Mom replied with a cautious, "Of course, honey. We'll be there." Dad followed with a thumbs-up emoji, the same emoji he used when he didn't want to say real words. I read that little symbol over and over, wondering if he felt even a flicker of remorse. I doubted it. The day of the dinner arrived with an unsettling quiet. I'd cleaned my apartment top to bottom. Candles on the counter, soft music playing, the smell of roasted herbs filling the air. It almost felt like a real family gathering. Almost. I made all their favorites. Mom's rosemary chicken, Dad's mashed potatoes with extra butter. Even that cranberry sauce I always hated as a kid, but made anyway because tradition demanded it. As I cooked, I thought about the Thanksgivings we used to have. The laughter, the chaos, the way Mom would fuss over everything while Dad tested the turkey with a spoonful of gravy. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Until it wasn't. When the doorbell finally rang, my heart jumped. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands, and opened the door. There they were, standing side by side, like nothing had ever happened. Mom held a pie box with a bright smile. Dad had a bottle of wine. Both of them looked relieved, like they'd been waiting for this moment to smooth things over without ever saying the hard words. "Madeline, sweetie." Mom rushed forward and hugged me. I let her. Her perfume was the same. Warm vanilla, comforting and painful at the same time. Dad gave a stiff pat on my shoulder. "Smells great in here. Looks like you've been busy." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It's been a busy year." His smile faltered for just a second. "Good." We sat down at the table. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. The food, the candles, the polite chatter about weather and work. But underneath, tension hummed like an invisible wire stretched too tight. Mom picked up her fork. "I'm so glad you invited us, honey. It's been too long. I know things got a little complicated back in November, but..." I set down my glass. "Complicated?" I repeated softly. She froze. Dad looked up from his plate. "Sweetheart," Mom began carefully. "You know how the holidays can be. We just needed some quiet time. It wasn't personal." I leaned back in my chair. "Not personal? You told me not to come home. You said you needed space from me. How exactly is that not personal?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the air. Dad cleared his throat. "Madeline, your mother didn't mean it that way. We were just tired. There's been so much going on with your brother's family, the travel, the..." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that startled even me. "You mean you had too much going on with them? Not me." Mom's eyes widened, her fork hovering midair. "Madeline, that's not fair." "No," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "What wasn't fair was being told my own parents needed space from me while you spent Thanksgiving with everyone else. You didn't need quiet, Mom. You needed distance. From me." For a moment, all I heard was the faint ticking of the wall clock. Mom's lips trembled. "That's not true. We just thought..." "What?" "That I wouldn't find out." I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That maybe if you ignored me long enough, I'd stop showing up altogether?" Dad sighed heavily and set down his knife. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Maddie. It wasn't some big conspiracy. Families go through things. Sometimes we all need breathing room." "Breathing room?" I echoed. "Then why did you spend that breathing room with everyone but me?" The truth hung in the air now, heavy, undeniable. Dad avoided my eyes, focusing on his plate like it held the answers. Mom wiped at the corner of her eyes, her mascara smudging slightly. Finally, she whispered, "We didn't want a scene, Madeline. You've always been emotional. We thought it would be easier to avoid tension." There it was. The sentence I'd heard in 100 different ways throughout my life. Emotional. Too sensitive. Overreacting. I felt my hands tremble, but I didn't hide it. "You know what's funny?" I said quietly. "You're the ones who always told me family sticks together no matter what. But when things got uncomfortable, when I started standing up for myself, you called me emotional." Mom covered her face with her hands. Dad muttered something about not doing this tonight. I stared at them. These two people who'd raised me, loved me in their own flawed way, but never really listened. "You said you needed space." I continued, my tone softening now. "But I think what you really needed was control. You couldn't handle that I finally stopped agreeing with everything you said. That I stopped being your easy, smiling daughter who never questioned anything." The words hung there like smoke, impossible to ignore. For the first time, neither of them interrupted. Dad's shoulders slumped. "Maybe we didn't handle it right," he admitted quietly. "But you weren't exactly easy to talk to either." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. He wasn't entirely wrong. I had snapped, yelled, said things in frustration I didn't mean. But none of that erased what they'd done. So I just said, "Maybe not. But I tried. I called. I texted. I waited. And you both chose silence." Mom looked up then, tears streaking down her cheeks. "We were scared, Madeline. You were so angry last time we spoke. I didn't want it to turn into another argument." "Then you should have faced it," I said softly. "Not run from it." A long silence followed. The kind that makes you aware of every sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint crackle of a candle wick, the thud of my heart. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Mom said, "You're right." I blinked. "What?" "You're right," she repeated, her voice breaking. "We handled it wrong. I thought we were protecting the family from more fights. But all we did was break it further." Dad looked at her, then at me. His jaw tightened. "We made mistakes. I won't pretend otherwise." For a second, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, genuine remorse. It didn't erase the hurt, but it was real. Dinner continued quietly after that. The air was still heavy, but not as suffocating as before. Every bite felt strange, like eating in the middle of a confession. Mom reached across the table and touched my hand. Can we try again, Madeline? Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow. But can we start fixing this? I stared at her hand for a moment, then nodded slowly. I don't know how, but maybe. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. Dad exhaled deeply, almost in relief. I'd like that too. When they finally left later that night, I stood at the door watching their car disappear into the streetlights. The dishes were still on the table, the candles nearly burned out, the food untouched on half the plates. But for once, I didn't feel hollow. That dinner wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. About finally saying everything I'd buried under years of silence and politeness. They might not have deserved that dinner. But I did. As I turned off the lights and looked at the quiet table one last time, I whispered to myself, this time I got to serve the truth. And it finally felt like Thanksgiving, not because of the food or the family, but because for the first time, I had peace. After my parents' car disappeared down the street, I stood there for a long time, just staring at the empty space where their taillights had vanished. The silence that followed was unlike any other I'd felt before. It wasn't heavy or suffocating this time. It was oddly peaceful, like the house could finally breathe again. The candles had melted into soft puddles, the last flame flickering weakly beside a half-eaten slice of pie. My living room smelled of rosemary and warm butter. The scent of the dinner I'd made for closure, not celebration. I walked back to the table and began clearing the plates one by one. Each dish felt like a chapter closing. The leftover mashed potatoes, the untouched cranberry sauce, all of it a quiet reminder of what that night had really been about. It wasn't about food. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about truth, finally spoken out loud, after years of swallowing it in silence. But as I wiped down the counter, I felt something unfamiliar creeping in. Not guilt, not sadness, just an ache. The kind that comes after emotional exhaustion, when your heart isn't sure whether to feel proud or broken. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 11:30 p.m. outside. The city had settled into a sleepy hum. A few cars passed now and then, headlights sliding across the curtains. I poured myself a cup of tea and curled up on the couch, my body still heavy from the tension of the evening. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't angry. I was just quiet inside. As I sat there, I noticed something small. Mom's pie box still sitting on the kitchen counter. She'd forgotten it. I smiled faintly. Typical. She'd probably call about it in the morning, using it as an excuse to reach out again. And for the first time, I realized I wouldn't dread that call. I wouldn't flinch or overthink what to say. Because tonight, I'd said everything I needed to. Still, sleep didn't come easily. My mind replayed every word of that dinner like a film stuck on repeat. Mom's trembling voice, Dad's stiff silence. The way they both avoided eye contact until the truth cornered them. There was a time when I would have taken their tears as victory. But now I just felt human. Fallible. Like we were all just people trying and failing in different ways. At one point, I even wondered, had I gone too far? Should I have been softer, kinder, more forgiving? But then I remembered how lonely Thanksgiving had been. How it felt to see pictures of them smiling around a table without me. No. They needed to hear it. And I needed to say it. Around midnight, I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The street was empty, but a soft rain had begun to fall, thin, silvery lines against the pavement. The sound was gentle, almost soothing. Rain always had a strange way of calming me. Maybe because it reminded me that even storms eventually softened. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and whispered, maybe this is what healing sounds like. The words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain, but true. My phone buzzed just then, a text from Mom. We made it home. Thank you for dinner, sweetheart. We love you. 3 simple sentences. And yet, I stared at them for several minutes. The thank you part felt genuine. The we love you part may be half true. But I couldn't deny the effort. I typed a reply slowly. Glad you got home safe. Sleep well. Short. Polite. Peaceful. Then I set my phone down and exhaled. For once, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself, to apologize, or to read between their words. It was enough. A little later, I turned off the lights and headed to bed. The sheets felt cool against my skin, the quiet hum of the heater lulling me into a state between wakefulness and sleep. But my mind refused to rest. I kept thinking about something Dad said. Families go through things. It sounded so simple, so dismissive at the time. But lying there in the dark, I realized he wasn't entirely wrong. Families do go through things, painful, messy, complicated things. The difference was, I'd always been the one to clean up after those messes, to keep the peace. This time, I'd let the mess show. And maybe that was okay. I reached over to my nightstand and picked up an old photo. The three of us at the lake years ago, before life got complicated. I was maybe 10, sitting between them, smiling with sunburned cheeks. Mom's arm was around me. Dad was holding a fishing pole. I ran my thumb over the picture. "We were happy once," I whispered. Or maybe I just thought we were. A tear slipped down my cheek, not from sadness but from acceptance. Some things weren't meant to be perfect. They were just meant to be real. The night deepened. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke to the soft sound of my phone vibrating again. It was nearly 2 a.m. Another message, this time from Dad. "Didn't say this at dinner, but I'm proud of you. You spoke your truth tonight. I heard you." I read it 3 times, hardly believing it came from him. Dad wasn't one for emotional messages. He was a man of practical words, taxes, repairs, schedules. "I'm proud of you" wasn't part of his usual vocabulary. That small message hit harder than I expected. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat there, feeling the warmth of those words settle somewhere deep inside me. For years, I'd craved his approval, his acknowledgement. Not for achievements, but for simply being me. And maybe, finally, he'd seen me as that. Not as the child he needed to correct or the daughter who disappointed, but as a woman who had found her voice. I typed back, fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you, Dad. That means more than you know." Then I put the phone down, turned onto my side, and let myself breathe. By morning, the rain had stopped. A thin layer of sunlight peeked through the blinds, making my living room glow in a soft golden hue. The house felt lighter, not empty but open. I brewed coffee and stood by the window again, watching the world slowly wake up. For once, I didn't reach for my phone, didn't check for messages. The silence wasn't something to fix anymore, it was something to keep. Then, as if on cue, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, her voice tentative but gentle. "I just wanted to say, last night was hard, but it was good too. I think we all needed that." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, we did. I hope you know we love you," she continued. "We might not always get it right, but we're trying." "I know," I said softly. "And I'm not angry anymore. I just needed to be heard." She paused, then said quietly, "You were. I promise." For once, I believed her. After we hung up, I sat down with my coffee and let the quiet moments stretch. I thought about how strange it was. How peace rarely arrives the way you imagine it. I'd spent weeks bracing for another fight, another rejection. Instead, what I found was something gentler. The beginning of understanding. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but maybe forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. Maybe it starts with a single dinner, a single truth, and a night afterward when you finally sleep without bitterness. That night after the dinner didn't change everything, but it changed enough. Enough for me to stop replaying old memories like wounds. Enough to let my heart rest just a little. As I looked around my apartment, the clean dishes, the empty candles, the faint smell of rosemary still lingering, I realized something simple but profound. The peace I'd been waiting for didn't come from them. It came from me finally letting go of needing their version of love to feel whole. I'd given them the dinner they didn't deserve, but I'd also given myself the closure I did. That night, as the sky dimmed again and I curled up under my blanket, I whispered one last thing into the quiet. "Next Thanksgiving, I'll still cook dinner. But this time, I'll invite peace first." And for the first time in years, I drifted to sleep with a full heart. Not from food, not from validation, but from finally telling my story aloud and surviving it. The morning after Thanksgiving, the air in my apartment felt lighter. Not just clean but different. Like someone had opened a window in a house that had been closed for years. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen as sunlight stretched across the wooden floor. I stood by the counter, stirring my cup slowly, watching the small circles ripple and fade. For the first time in months, there was no heaviness sitting on my chest. No fear of what my parents might say next. No guilt for not being the daughter they expected. Just quiet. I thought about how, only a week ago, that same quiet felt unbearable. The silence after they'd told me, "Skip Thanksgiving this year. We need space." Those words had burned when they said them. But now, standing here in my little kitchen, I finally understood something. Maybe space wasn't always punishment. Maybe sometimes it was the distance you needed to breathe, to see things clearly. Later that morning, I stepped outside. The neighborhood was calm. A few kids riding their bikes, an elderly couple walking their golden retriever, leaves crunching underfoot. The air had that crisp bite that only late November carries. As I walked down the street toward the park, I noticed the world looked softer. Or maybe I was just looking at it differently. I sat on my usual bench by the pond, watching a few ducks float lazily across the water. I used to come here after hard days, when I couldn't make sense of my parents' moods or my own guilt. Today, I didn't come to escape them. I came to meet myself again. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old pictures, birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings. So many smiles. But looking at them now, I realized something. Most of those smiles were mine, not theirs. I was always the one holding things together, always trying to make everything normal. And maybe that was the problem. I'd spent years trying to fill the silence they created instead of letting it teach me something. When I got home, there was a voicemail waiting. Mom's voice, soft but steady. "Hey sweetheart. I hope you slept well. Your dad and I were talking this morning, and we just wanted to say we're sorry. For everything. For pushing you away when we should have pulled you closer." She paused. I could hear the faint sound of clinking dishes in the background. Maybe she was making breakfast while recording it. That small sound, ordinary as it was, hit me unexpectedly. It was the sound of my childhood mornings. Pancakes, coffee, laughter that felt safe. "We thought space meant distance," she continued, "but I think it was really just a way to avoid facing what we'd done. You didn't deserve that, honey." My throat tightened. I sat down at the table, phone pressed against my palm, her words sinking deep. They were late. But they were honest. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to correct or add anything. I just listened. When she finished, I whispered to no one, "That's enough, Mom. That's finally enough." That afternoon, I cleaned the apartment. Not out of stress or distraction. Just because it felt good to start fresh. I boxed up old photos and things that no longer brought peace. Not to erase the past, but to make room for what was next. As I packed, I found an old letter in my desk drawer, something I'd written to my parents 2 years ago but never sent. It started with, "I wish you'd see me as more than what you want me to be." Reading it now, my hands trembled. That girl who'd written those words had been hurting, desperate for validation. I wasn't her anymore. I folded the letter back up and slipped it into a book, not to forget it, but to remind myself of how far I'd come. Around 4 p.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Dad. "Hey kiddo," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "Your mom told me she left you a message. Guess I just wanted to check in." I smiled a little. "Yeah, I heard it. Thanks for calling." There was a short pause. Then surprisingly he said, "You were right. About everything you said last night. We weren't listening. We were trying to keep things neat, tidy. But life's not tidy, huh?" I chuckled softly. "No, it's not. I didn't realize how much we hurt you when we said we needed space," he continued. "We thought we were protecting you. Or maybe protecting ourselves. Either way, it was wrong." His voice cracked just slightly on the last word, and it made something in me shift. "Dad," I said quietly, "I think we all needed that space. Just, not for the reasons we thought." He sighed, but it wasn't the heavy, defensive kind of sigh he used to give. It was soft, almost relieved. "You're probably right. Still doesn't make it easy." "Nothing real ever is," I replied. He laughed lightly, that small, rare sound I hadn't heard in years. "You've gotten wise, kiddo. Guess someone had to," I said, smiling. When we hung up, I felt something close, Not the distance between us, but the wound itself. It wasn't healed yet, but it was no longer bleeding. That evening, I decided to do something different. I drove out to the small diner on Route 27. The one my parents and I used to visit after church when I was a teenager. It hadn't changed much, same red vinyl booths, same chalkboard menu, same hum of conversation and coffee machines. I slid into a booth and ordered my usual, grilled cheese and tomato soup. It was simple, familiar, comforting. As I waited, I overheard two women at the next booth talking about their Thanksgiving dinners. One said, "It's funny how family brings out the best and worst in you at the same time." They both laughed, and I smiled quietly to myself. Ain't that the truth, I thought. When my meal came, I sat there for a long time, savoring each bite, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, contentment. It wasn't joy exactly. It wasn't relief either. It was something in between, the calm that comes after a storm, when you finally realize the house is still standing. Later that night, I took a drive out to my parents' neighborhood. I didn't plan to stop or go inside. I just wanted to see it, the house that had shaped so much of who I was. The porch light was on. Their kitchen window glowed faintly. I could see shadows moving, maybe Mom doing dishes, Dad watching TV. For a moment, I just sat there in the car, my headlights off, hands resting on the steering wheel. I thought about all the Thanksgivings we'd shared in that house, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments that came after. Then I whispered softly, "We're going to be okay." Not because everything was fixed, but because we were finally being honest. When I got home that night, I opened my journal, something I hadn't touched in months. I started writing, not for them this time, but for me. Space isn't the absence of love. It's where love learns to breathe again. The words came easily, as if they'd been waiting inside me all along. I kept writing. Space is not silence. It's the sound of truth echoing back when the noise fades. Space isn't punishment. It's permission to grow, to reflect, to come back different. When I set the pen down, I realized tears had slipped down my cheeks. But they weren't the same kind of tears I'd cried weeks ago. These were softer, freer. The next morning I got another text, this time a photo. It was from Mom. The pie box. She'd written, "Guess I left this behind on purpose. Maybe next time we'll bake one together." I laughed softly. "Maybe we will," I murmured to myself. Then I sent back a simple reply. "I'd like that." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, just honest. And that was enough. As the days passed, I started noticing small things. How much quieter my mind felt. How mornings didn't feel heavy anymore. How even the silence between texts with my parents didn't sting. We didn't talk every day, and that was okay. We didn't need to. Because real space, the kind that heals instead of harms, isn't about distance. It's about trust. Trust that love doesn't vanish just because you stop forcing it to show up a certain way. 1 week later, Mom called again. She said, "We were thinking, maybe next year you could host Thanksgiving again. But this time let's make it together. No expectations, no pretending. Just us." I smiled, the kind that comes from the heart. "Yeah, Mom. I think that sounds perfect." And for the first time in years, I actually meant it. That night, as I curled up on the couch with a blanket and my tea, I looked out at the quiet street. The same one that had felt lonely a week ago. Now it just felt peaceful. I thought back to those words, "Skip Thanksgiving. We need space." Maybe that was the hardest thing they ever said to me. But maybe it was also the most important. Because it forced all of us to stop pretending, to see who we were without the illusion of perfect family. It taught me that sometimes space isn't what breaks a family, it's what gives it a chance to grow back differently. And as I sipped my tea, watching the rain start again outside, I realized something simple but powerful. They hadn't just realized their mistake that Thanksgiving. They'd given me the space to realize my own strength.